On 6 June 1944, the English Channel breathed cold mist toward Normandy, while the fate of Europe waited, suspended between courage and catastrophe, history holding its breath. Before dawn broke, General George S. Patton stood alone in a quiet English manner, boots polished, jaw tight, staring at maps soaked with pins, arrows, and consequences. He was officially sidelined, publicly silent, politically dangerous, yet privately alert, because war had taught him that disasters announce themselves softly, before they scream. Across the channel, Allied soldiers loaded rifles with shaking hands, whispered prayers in different languages, and trusted generals they would never meet with their lives. D-Day was meant to be precision, harmony, and momentum, yet beneath the confidence, fractures spread through the Allied command like hairline cracks in ice. Field Marshal Montgomery, brilliant, cautious, and stubborn, had shaped the Normandy plan, insisting on a narrow front, slow build-up, and absolute control. Montgomery believed time favored the Allies, resources favored the Allies, and that German resistance would break under methodical pressure, inch by bloody inch. Patton believed the opposite. Speed was mercy, hesitation was murder, and war rewarded violence of action, not patience written in memoranda. On 5 June 1944, as weather reports shifted and Eisenhower hesitated, Patton sensed something darker than storms approaching the beaches of France. The landings would succeed, he believed, but success without momentum could rot, allowing German armor to regroup, counterattack, and strangle the beachheads. Montgomery's plan risked exactly that: congestion on the beaches, delays inland, and a battle of attrition the Germans understood too well. Patton had been removed from command months earlier, punished for slapping a soldier, humiliated in public, yet secretly valued for deception and deterrence. The Germans feared him, respected him, tracked his movements obsessively, and that fear alone had become a weapon the Allies could not afford to waste. As Allied paratroopers dropped into darkness on 6 June 1944, Patton realized the invasion's greatest danger might not be German fire, but Allied caution. In quiet rooms far from gunfire, decisions were forming that would decide whether Normandy became a gateway to liberation, or a graveyard of stalled ambition. Patton waited, restrained but restless, knowing that when Montgomery's caution met German resilience, someone would have to move fast, or everything would bleed. On 7 June 1944, smoke still clung to the Norman hedgerows, while the beaches behind them choked with men, machines, and mounting uncertainty. The invasion had succeeded, headlines would later say. Yet success felt fragile, improvised, and frighteningly slow to those watching from command tents. Montgomery, calm and composed, surveyed the situation near Cannes, convinced that consolidation mattered more than speed, patience more than risk. German resistance was stiffer than predicted. Panzer divisions were already moving, and the narrow Allied front began to feel dangerously compressed. By 8 June 1944, British and Canadian forces stalled outside Cannes, a city Montgomery had promised to take on the first day. Every hour of delay gave Field Marshal Rommel breathing room, allowing German armor to dig in, reposition, and prepare counterblows. The hedgerows turned fields into killing corridors. Tanks burned in tight lanes, and infantry learned that Normandy would not break easily. From England, Patton watched reports arrive with grim familiarity. Slow advances, mounting casualties, and opportunities slipping through cautious fingers. He knew this pattern, from North Africa to Sicily, where hesitation had allowed enemies to escape, regroup, and prolong the slaughter. Montgomery's methodical grind was not wrong in theory, but theory bled men when speed was required, and Germany still had teeth. On 10 June 1944, Eisenhower faced a quiet nightmare. Beaches secured, yes, but momentum fading, and the invasion's fragile spine exposed. If the Germans launched a coordinated counterattack, The Allies could be pushed back into the sea. History rewritten in fire and shame. Eisenhower trusted Montgomery, respected his discipline, yet understood Patton's value. Violence applied at the right moment could save everything. Patton, officially commanding a phantom army, was still shackled by politics, reputation, and the fear of his own reputation. Yet behind closed doors, contingency plans began to whisper his name. Not as a symbol, but as a solution. The Allies did not need another careful planner, they needed a breaker. Someone to tear open the front before it sealed shut. By 12 June 1944, German armor pressed hard near Caen, while American forces struggled to push inland through blood-soaked hedgerows. Montgomery held his line, refusing to pivot, convinced pressure alone would crack German resistance. Patton felt the noose tightening, because every static day in Normandy multiplied the cost of eventual victory. The stage was set, not for glory, but for necessity, and soon, restraint would give way to desperation. On 19 June 1944, the sky itself turned against the invasion, as the worst storm in decades slammed into the Normandy coast without mercy. Artificial mulberry harbors shattered under black waves. Landing craft broke loose, and supplies meant for advancing armies sank into the channel. For 2 days, the Allies stood frozen, while German commanders believed fate, at last, had chosen a side. Montgomery's tightly packed front now became a liability, because stalled units could not maneuver, resupply, or adapt under chaotic conditions. The storm magnified every flaw. Vehicles clogged narrow roads, wounded piled up, and ammunition failed to reach the line when it mattered most. German artillery exploited the paralysis, probing for weaknesses, testing whether the beachhead could be broken by pressure alone. Patton saw the danger instantly, because chaos punished hesitation, and storms rewarded bold, decisive movement. He argued, through intermediaries, that dispersion, speed, and offensive maneuver were the only antidotes to paralysis. A static army, he believed, was already halfway defeated, especially under skies that denied air superiority. By 21 June 1944, the storm passed, leaving behind wreckage, exhaustion, and a command structure forced to confront reality. Montgomery still pushed toward Caen, doubling down on attrition, believing German armor pinned there would protect the American sector. But that protection came at a price. American units faced deep hedgerows with insufficient armor support, and progress slowed to yards per day. On 24 June 1944, German commanders sensed opportunity. Allied supply lines stretched thin, leadership divided, and weather delays fresh in memory. Rommel pressed for counterattacks, arguing that the invasion was vulnerable before it could fully spread inland. Every Allied delay fed German confidence, and confidence, in war, can be as lethal as steel. Patton, sidelined but relentless, prepared his staff quietly, studying routes, bridges, and German weaknesses beyond the hedgerows. He knew that when the call came, there would be no time for rehearsal, only execution. The longer Montgomery's battle for Caen dragged on, the more inevitable Patton's return became. By late June 1944, the invasion had not failed, but it was bleeding momentum. And momentum was everything. Allied leaders faced a brutal truth. Either they shattered the stalemate, or Normandy would become a grinding slaughter. The moment of decision approached, not with fanfare, but with urgency sharpened by loss. On 25 July 1944, the skies over Normandy filled with Allied bombers, engines droning like distant thunder, while the ground waited to break. This was Operation Cobra, a desperate gamble to smash the German line, and finally restore the momentum lost in hedgerows and hesitation. For Montgomery, Cobra was a supporting act. Pressure in the American sector while his forces continued to bleed. German armor near Caen. For Patton, watching from the sidelines, it was the opening crack in a door he had waited months to kick open. The bombing began with devastating force, yet imperfect execution, because war rarely obeys intent. Short drops killed American soldiers. Confusion rippled through the front, and for a moment, disaster threatened to compound disaster. But when the smoke lifted, something extraordinary emerged. German lines were torn apart, command shattered, resistance disorganized and thin. By 26 July 1944, American infantry and armor surged forward, finally moving beyond the hedgerows that had swallowed weeks of blood. This was the moment Patton had predicted. The instant when speed mattered more than caution, exploitation more than consolidation. Yet Montgomery hesitated to fully shift strategy, still focused on holding German armor in the east. Even as the West began to collapse, Eisenhower faced a decision heavy with consequence: whether to continue measured advances, or unleash the one commander built for chaos and pursuit. The invasion no longer needed containment. It needed expansion, violence, and relentless pressure on a broken enemy. Patton's name resurfaced, not as a liability, but as a solution forged by necessity. On 27 July 1944, orders moved quietly, command structures adjusted, and Patton's Third Army prepared to enter the fight. His staff moved with urgency, vehicles rolled south, and radios crackled with anticipation sharpened by restraint finally lifted. The German front was unraveling, and every hour lost risked allowing it to stitch itself back together. Montgomery's strategy had pinned German strength, but it could not finish the job alone. Now, the war demanded exploitation, pursuit, and the kind of aggression only one man embodied. Patton was no longer waiting to save D-Day's promise, he was about to enforce it. The breakout had begun, but the real test, turning rupture into rout, still lay ahead. On 1 August 1944, General George S. Patton finally stepped onto French soil, boots touching ground that would soon shake under his advance. The Third Army was activated at a moment when opportunity burned brighter than caution, and hesitation could still undo everything Cobra had achieved. Patton did not arrive gently. He arrived with intent, urgency, and a belief that speed itself was a weapon. Within hours, his orders cut against convention: push forward, bypass resistance, and let the enemy collapse behind you. While Montgomery's forces remained locked in grinding battles near Cannes, Patton turned west and south, hunting space, roads, and momentum. German units, already fractured, found themselves outpaced, outflanked, and suddenly uncertain where the front even existed. By 3 August 1944, Patton's columns surged through Avranches, a gateway Montgomery's cautious tempo might have turned into another bottleneck. Instead, it became a floodgate. Armor pouring through, supply trucks racing to keep up, maps becoming obsolete by the hour. Patton ignored tidy lines, because disorder in the enemy was worth more than order on paper. German commanders panicked. Their communications fractured, reserves misdirected, and counterattacks launched too late to matter. What Montgomery had pinned, Patton now began to destroy. Not with patience, but with relentless motion. Every mile gained reduced German cohesion. Every day accelerated the collapse of resistance across western France. On 7 August 1944, Hitler ordered Operation Luttich, a desperate counterattack aimed at cutting Patton's spearheads and restoring control. German armor struck near Morton, hoping to sever the breakout corridor and trap the Third Army. But speed had created depth, and depth absorbed the blow. American units bent but did not break. Patton reacted instantly, redirecting forces mid-march, exploiting German overcommitment, and turning defense into opportunity. Montgomery's attritional battles had held the enemy in place, but Patton's aggression now ensured they could not escape. The invasion, once fragile, now expanded with terrifying momentum for those on the receiving end. By mid-August 1944, Normandy was no longer a foothold, it was a launch pad. Patton had not replaced Montgomery's role, he had completed it, transforming containment into catastrophe for Germany. The Allies stood on the edge of total breakthrough. But coordination, egos, and strategy would soon collide again. On 12 August 1944, the German army in Normandy began to feel the walls closing in. Steel and fate tightening from every direction. Patton's Third Army raced east, while British and Canadian forces pressed south. The enemy squeezed between momentum and exhaustion. What had begun as a breakout now threatened to become annihilation, if Allied coordination could keep pace with opportunity. At the center of the unfolding trap lay Falaise, a name soon to be written in fire, blood, and controversy. Montgomery envisioned a deliberate closure, tightening the noose carefully, ensuring German destruction without risking Allied overextension. Patton saw something else, a fleeting moment when speed could end the campaign entirely, if allowed to strike without restraint. By 14 August 1944, Patton's armored spearheads reached Argentan, the southern jaw of the trap. Ahead lay open roads, retreating Germans, and the possibility of sealing the pocket within days. Patton requested permission to continue north, to close the gap and finish the enemy in one violent stroke. The order never came. Montgomery, supported by higher command, halted Patton's advance, fearing collision with Allied forces and loss of control. Caution reasserted itself at the very moment speed offered finality. Between 15 August 1944 and 18 August 1944, thousands of German soldiers escaped through the narrowing corridor. They left behind shattered equipment, dead comrades, and the remnants of once formidable divisions. Yet escape, even wounded and disorganized, meant the war would continue. Across France, into Germany itself. Patton seethed, because he understood what had been lost. Not victory, but decisiveness. Montgomery argued destruction had still been immense, and preservation of Allied lives justified restraint. Both were right, and both were wrong, because war rarely offers clean answers. By 20 August 1944, the Falaise Pocket closed at last. Too late to end the campaign outright, but enough to break German power in the West. Normandy was secure, Paris soon liberated, and the invasion saved, not by one man, but by tension between two visions of war. Yet the question lingered, had D-Day required saving from disaster? Or had disaster been narrowly avoided by conflicting strengths? The answer lay ahead, in the pursuit across France, where Patton would again be unleashed. On 25 August 1944, Paris erupted in celebration. Church bells ringing through streets once patrolled by fear. While the war refused to slow, liberation brought joy, but also urgency. Because German forces were retreating, not surrendering, trading ground for time. For Patton, time was the one resource the enemy must never be allowed to reclaim. As summer waned, Patton's Third Army surged eastward, crossing rivers, seizing bridges, and outpacing supply lines stretched to breaking. Fuel became more precious than bullets. Engines stalled where courage could not, and momentum threatened to die on the roadside. Patton demanded priority, arguing speed now would shorten the war, while delay would harden German resistance behind new lines. Montgomery disagreed, advocating a concentrated thrust in the north, a single decisive blow toward the Ruhr. Resources were finite, choices unavoidable, and Eisenhower stood between two commanders who embodied opposite philosophies. The unity that had saved Normandy now strained under competing visions of how to end the war. By 2 September 1944, Patton's advance slowed, not by Germans, but by empty fuel tanks and logistical ceilings. Opportunities flickered and vanished, bridges blown just ahead, towns taken too late to matter strategically. Patton fumed, convinced that caution, once again, was stealing victory mile by mile. Montgomery's plan soon took shape as Operation Market Garden. Bold in concept, risky in execution, and dependent on perfect timing. Patton watched as resources shifted north, knowing that failure there would echo across the entire front. He pressed on regardless, fighting for every drop of fuel, every mile of road. On 17 September 1944, Market Garden began. Airborne troops dropping deep behind enemy lines. Hope descending with parachutes. When it faltered, the cost was immediate. Heavy casualties, lost momentum, and another chance slipping away. Patton did not celebrate the failure, because every setback prolonged the war for everyone. By late September 1944, the front stabilized again, not from defeat, but from exhaustion and limits of supply. The lesson of Normandy resurfaced. Speed creates opportunity, but coordination decides outcomes. The question returned with sharper edges. Had restraint protected the Allies? Or had it quietly extended the war? On 16 December 1944, winter descended with German artillery, as Hitler launched a final gamble through the Ardennes forests. Snow-muffled movement, radios failed in frozen air, and American lines buckled under surprise and pressure. What began as celebration weeks earlier now turned into emergency. Fear and raw survival. The Battle of the Bulge exposed the cost of stretched fronts and competing priorities. German forces punching deep into Allied lines. Montgomery assumed temporary control in the north, stabilizing shattered units with discipline and order. Patton, far to the south, immediately sensed opportunity buried inside crisis. On 18 December 1944, Patton performed the impossible, pivoting the Third Army 90 degrees in brutal winter conditions. Men marched through snow, engines froze overnight, and schedules once unthinkable became reality through sheer force of will. Patton did not ask if it could be done, he demanded it be done. By 22 December 1944, surrounded American forces held Bastogne, refusing surrender under relentless German assault. Patton's columns raced toward them. Roads choked with ice, supplies scarce, and pressure unrelenting. Every hour mattered, because hesitation now meant encirclement, capture, or annihilation. Montgomery worked methodically to stabilize the northern shoulder, while Patton struck hard from the south. The contrast mirrored Normandy once more. Containment paired with violence, caution balanced by audacity. Together, though rarely in harmony, they stopped the last great German offensive. On 26 December 1944, Patton's forces broke through to Bastogne, relief arriving not as triumph, but as survival. The German gamble collapsed, reserves exhausted, initiative lost forever. What remained was retreat, attrition, and inevitable defeat. The Bulge proved what Normandy had only suggested. War demands both restraint and ferocity, order and chaos. Patton's speed saved lives in winter, just as it had saved momentum in summer. As 1945 approached, the end felt closer. Yet the reckoning between legacies remained unresolved. On 3 January 1945, the Western Front moved again, not with surprise, but with grim inevitability pushing eastward. The German army was broken, yet dangerous, retreating through villages already hollowed by years of war. For Patton, the finish mattered as much as the start, because careless endings still cost lives. As Allied forces crossed into Germany, destruction replaced liberation as the dominant sight. Factories silent, cities scarred, civilians exhausted. Patton's Third Army crossed the Rhine with relentless efficiency. Speed still his signature, even as resistance stiffened near the homeland. Montgomery advanced more deliberately in the north, securing flanks, preserving order, and preventing sudden reversals. By 22 March 1945, the Rhine barrier collapsed under Allied pressure, and Germany's last natural defense vanished. Patton drove hard into Bavaria, bypassing strongpoints, collapsing pockets, and denying the enemy time to organize. The war now felt less like a campaign, and more like a pursuit of something already dying. Behind the lines, debate hardened into history. Whose approach had truly saved D-Day? Whose decisions shortened the war? Montgomery claimed method had preserved Allied strength, avoiding reckless losses and catastrophic mistakes. Patton argued momentum had crushed German will, preventing drawn-out slaughter across Europe. Both claims carried truth, and both carried the weight of the dead. Normandy had required restraint to survive, and aggression to succeed. A paradox that defined the entire campaign. Without Montgomery, the front might have collapsed. Without Patton, it might have stagnated. By 30 April 1945, Hitler was dead, Berlin encircled, and the Third Reich reduced to ruins. The war in Europe was effectively over, but judgment was only beginning. Historians would argue over maps, orders, and egos. But soldiers remembered moments: speed, fear, and survival. Patton did not celebrate quietly, nor did he claim humility. He believed war rewarded those who acted, and punished those who waited too long. Montgomery believed war demanded control, discipline, and patience above all. The question lingered beyond victory, not who was right, but what had truly saved D-Day from disaster.
On 8 May 1945, Europe exhaled at last. Surrender signed, guns silent, and a continent stepped out of shadow. Victory came not as a single moment, but as the accumulation of decisions, delays, risks, and rival visions that shaped survival. D-Day, once balanced on the edge of failure, now stood as the foundation of liberation. History would later argue that Montgomery's caution held the line, preventing collapse during the invasion's most fragile weeks. His method pinned German armor, absorbed counterattacks, and bought time when the beachhead could not afford chaos. Without that discipline, Normandy might have shattered before momentum ever mattered. Yet history would also acknowledge that caution alone could not win Normandy. It was Patton's speed, unleashed at precisely the right moment, that transformed survival into domination. He did not save D-Day by landing on the beaches, but by ensuring the beaches did not become graves of hesitation. The disaster was not Montgomery's intent, but the risk of stagnation his strategy carried. Patton did not replace that strategy, he completed it, exploiting what restraint preserved. Together, though rarely aligned in temperament or trust, they formed a brutal balance. D-Day survived because containment met exploitation, patience met violence, and leadership clashed without breaking unity. The war demanded both men, even as it exposed their flaws under unforgiving light. Victory was born not from harmony, but from tension held just short of fracture. Patton would die later that year, his legacy frozen in controversy and steel. Montgomery would live to defend his decisions, firm in belief, unyielding in memory. Between them lay Normandy, blood-soaked fields where theory met consequence. In the end, D-Day was not saved by a single general, but by the moment restraint stepped aside for speed. That moment belonged to Patton, but only because Montgomery had held the door long enough. History, like war, offered no simple hero, only necessary ones.